Picture a city where the sky's the colour of a bruise that never heals. Not blue, not grey. Something in between. Something with yellow in it. Something you wouldn't have a word for today, because today we've cleaned our skies up enough to forget what they used to look like. Now fill it with smoke. Not campfire smoke. Not the pleasant kind. Mill smoke. Coal smoke. The smoke of 10,000 chimneys running 24-hour a day, 7 days a week, including Sundays, because the machines don't observe the Sabbath and neither do the men who own them. Add the smell of the River Irk if you want to be specific. The river that Friedrich Engels, a young German visiting Manchester in 1845, described in terms that would make your eyes water. 60 feet wide at some points. Black, stinking with the refuse of the dye works upstream, the bone mills, the tanneries, a surface so thick with discharge that it barely moves. More of a slow-moving catastrophe than a river. Add the streets, unpaved in most places, mud and worse things mixed together into a paste that coats your boots to the ankle and stays there. Add 70,000 people crammed into a space designed for 20,000. Because the mills need workers and the workers need to live somewhere, and nobody is particularly concerned about what that somewhere looks like. That's Manchester. 1847, one of the most important cities in the world, the beating heart of the Industrial Revolution, the place that made the cloth that dressed half the planet, a place where a working child could lose 3 fingers to a loom before breakfast and be expected back at the machines by afternoon, a place where the average life expectancy in one of the working class districts, Ancoats, Little Ireland, Angel Meadow, was 17 years. Not 17 in addition to however long you'd already lived. 17 years total, from birth to death. 17. A place where the single most effective medical intervention available to a family with no money, no access to doctors, no understanding of germ theory, and a wound that was starting to turn the wrong colour, was to lie very still and let the dog lick it clean. We're going there tonight, not as observers, not as historians with clipboards and comfortable distance. We're living it. We're the ones with the wound. We're the ones watching the dog. So I make these history stories, and people seem to listen to them in the dark, which tells me something about the kind of people who are interested in, apparently, the full sensory experience of 19th century suffering as a sleep aid. I don't judge. I'm the one making them. Get comfortable. Pull whatever you're using for warmth a little tighter. Here we go. Your hand is wrong. You know it before you're fully awake. There's a knowledge in the body that arrives before the mind catches up. A hot, tight, pulsing wrongness that pulls you out of sleep the way a hand grabs a collar. You lie there for a moment in the dark. The room is cold. It's always cold. The walls of the court are too close together to let proper sun in, and the fireplace in the corner is dead. Has been dead since Tuesday, because the coal cost 3p a bucket, and you made 6p last week after the mill docked your wages for the time you spent untangling the thread that their own machine jammed with in the first place. 6p, after deductions. You hold your right hand up in the dark and you can feel the heat radiating off it before you can see anything. The cut you got 4 days ago, 3 inches along the base of your palm, courtesy of a metal bracket that had no business being where it was, courtesy of nobody's fault and therefore everybody's fault, and therefore nothing was done about it. The cut is angry this morning. You've been pressing rags to it. Clean ones at first, then less clean ones when the clean ones ran out. The rag is stuck to it now. You can feel the dried matter where the cloth has bonded to the wound, and you know from experience that pulling it off is going to be a special kind of bad. Around you, in this room that is approximately 12 feet by 14 feet, 5 other people are asleep. Your mother, in the bed against the far wall, breathing in that shallow way she's had since the winter illness 2 years ago that never fully left her lungs. Your 2 younger brothers, Jem, 11, and Thomas, 8, curled against each other like puppies in the corner where they've made a nest out of whatever cloth could be spared. They share a coat for warmth, not wearing it. Sleeping under it, your neighbour Mrs. Halloran, who has been sleeping in your room since her husband died in March and she couldn't make the rent on her own. She's Irish. She came over during the famine years and she's never quite lost the look of someone who expects the ground to give way. And, at the foot of what you generously call your bed, a ticked mattress filled with straw laid directly on the floorboards. The dog. The dog is the colour of river mud, not brown, not grey. The indeterminate colour of something that has been through conditions that strip it of easy classification. His name, insofar as he has one, is what you say when you want his attention, which varies. Sometimes it's dog, sometimes it's here, sometimes it's a noise that isn't really a word, a low clicking sound you make with your tongue, which he responds to faster than anything else. He is watching you, in the dark, with those eyes that somehow catch whatever faint light exists in a room that has very little faint light to offer. You hold out your right hand, not toward him, just out, into the dark, an inventory of damage. The swelling starts at the base of your palm and reaches almost to your wrist now. The skin has taken on a shine that isn't normal. In daylight, when you first got back from the mill yesterday, it looked red. This morning, you can feel this, you don't need to see it. It has a different quality. Tighter, harder. The skin over the infected area feels like it belongs to someone else. There is a word for what happens next if this continues. You know the word. Everyone in Ancoats knows the word. Mortification. Not the religious kind, not the embarrassment kind. The other kind. The kind where the flesh, without intervention, begins to die. The kind where the smell changes. The kind where a surgeon, if you could get to one, would look at your hand and tell you that the hand is the problem and the solution is to remove the problem. You are 14 years old. You sit up slowly, trying not to wake the others. The straw rustles beneath you. The dog lifts his head. You can see his nose working in the dark, reading the air the way you might read a letter, except he reads it better and faster and with more information than any letter could contain. You already know what he knows. You can smell it too now that you're upright. The hot, sour smell of infection, coming from your own hand, your own flesh, going bad at the edges. The dog stands up, stretches front paws out, arches his back in that long, shuddering stretch that dogs do, the one that looks like it's reorganizing their entire skeleton. Then he pads toward you across the floorboards, navigating around the sleeping forms of your brothers with the natural care of an animal that has always shared space with humans. He sits down in front of you, looks at your hand. You unwrap the rag slowly. The dried matter pulls away from the wound with a sensation you feel in your back teeth. Not quite pain, not quite not pain. The kind of feeling that makes you breathe through it, that makes the muscles of your jaw tighten involuntarily. The wound is open again now, 3 inches. Surprisingly clean edges for something that happened in a spinning mill at 6 in the morning. The flesh around it is puffy and wrong-coloured. At the centre, a gathering of yellow-white that tells you what you already knew. The dog leans forward and sniffs. Close. Close enough that you can feel his breath on your palm. Warm, damp, the smell of whatever scraps he ate last, overlaid with something animal and fundamental, the smell of a living creature's breath. Then he licks. And this is the moment. This is the thing we're here to understand. Not the dog, not the wound specifically. The world that made this the best option available. The world where a working-class family in 1847 Manchester looked at a wound going septic on their child's hand, and the best thing they had, the most reliable medical intervention in their entire arsenal, was a mongrel dog with river mud-coloured fur and a tongue that scientists would not fully understand for another 40 years. Let's talk about that world. You need to understand something first. Something that requires you to set aside everything you know about being ill. When you're sick today, genuinely sick, infected wound, fever, something wrong, there is a system. It is imperfect. It is expensive in places and unfair in places, and you will spend time on hold listening to music that makes you question your will to live. But it exists. Antibiotics exist. Antiseptics exist. Trained people exist who will look at an infected wound and tell you, with reasonable accuracy, what will happen and what needs to happen next. In 1847 Manchester, none of that exists. No antibiotics. Those are nearly a century away. Penicillin is 1928, and its implications won't be understood until the 1940s, and widespread production won't happen until after the Second World War. So forget antibiotics. No antiseptics in any meaningful sense. Joseph Lister won't publish his work on carbolic acid and surgical antisepsis until 1867, and even after that it will take decades to penetrate the practice of surgeons who are, to be blunt, deeply resistant to being told that they should wash their hands before cutting people open. So forget antiseptics. No germ theory. Louis Pasteur is still years from convincing the medical establishment that invisible living organisms cause disease. The reigning theory still in 1847, for many physicians and most ordinary people, is miasma, bad air, the belief that disease arises from putrefying organic matter, from the smell of the river, from rotting garbage, from swamps. The belief that if a place smells bad, disease will follow. This theory is, as it happens, not entirely useless. Places that smell of sewage and rotting matter often do breed disease. The logic is flawed. It's not the smell that causes it. It's the organisms in the contaminated water and waste. But the practical conclusion that you should probably try to clean things up is correct, even if the reasoning behind it isn't. But miasma theory also leads you badly wrong, in ways that cost lives. It means that when cholera strikes, you blame the smell. You clean the streets, you remove the stinking matter. You do not, crucially, tell people to stop drinking from the contaminated wells. It means that when an infected wound begins to smell, you understand this as evidence of what you already suspected, that the bad air got into it, and not as evidence of bacterial colonization. So those are your medical theories: miasma, bad air. And now, let's talk about what a doctor actually costs. In 1847, a general practitioner, a physician, a surgeon, charges between 1 shilling and 2 shillings 6pence for a consultation. That's on the low end. Specialists cost more, house calls cost more, medicine cost extra. You made 6pence last week. After deductions, a shilling is 12 pence. 6pence is half a shilling. So a single doctor's visit costs 2 to 5 times your entire weekly wage, and you have a mother who needs food, brothers who need feeding, a rent of 3 shillings a week for the privilege of sleeping in a room that is trying to kill you slowly. There are technically other options, the Poor Law dispensaries. Established under the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834, these charitable medical services are supposed to provide basic medical care to those who cannot pay. They exist. They are real. But in 1847 Manchester, in the middle of the famine migration, when Irish families are arriving in their thousands and the population of the courts and cellar dwellings is expanding faster than any system can handle, the dispensaries are overwhelmed, understaffed, under-resourced. The queue forms before dawn, and it doesn't guarantee you'll be seen. And even if you are seen, the medicine you're given may or may not be correct, because the man dispensing it may be a qualified physician or may be an unlicensed assistant making do. The workhouse infirmary exists. If you apply for poor relief, if you submit yourself to the workhouse system, you get medical care. You also give up your job, your home. Your children, if you have them, may be separated from you. The workhouse is designed to be worse than the worst job available by intent, because its architects believed that if it wasn't sufficiently terrible, the poor would prefer it to work, and this was unacceptable. So, your options are doctor you cannot afford, dispensary that may or may not see you, workhouse at the cost of everything you have, or the dog. And here is where things get interesting, because the people who chose the dog, who used the dog, who relied on the dog, were not ignorant savages doing something backward and disgusting out of pure desperation. They were practitioners of a tradition that stretched back in some form thousands of years. They were correct in ways they didn't have the vocabulary to explain, about something that science would spend a very long time catching up to. They just didn't know why. His name is Soldier. You decided this when you were 8 and he arrived. Appeared, really, the way dogs appeared in Ancoats, through a gap in a fence, following the smell of whatever was being cooked that evening. Your mother said no. Your mother said absolutely not. Your mother said we cannot feed another mouth. He has been sleeping at the foot of your mattress for 6 years. He is, as far as anyone can determine, some combination of terrier and something else, the something else being unclear and possibly also terrier. He is medium-sized. He weighs about what a large cat weighs. His ears don't match. One stands up straight, and one folds over, and this asymmetry gives him an expression of permanent quizzical attention that has gotten him more scraps than it probably should. His fur, as established, is the colour of river mud. His eyes are brown, ordinary, not the kind of eyes that poets write about. His nose is always working. This is important. His nose is always, without pause or exception, reading the air around him. You learned early that Soldier's nose was better than yours in ways that made him useful. Not just for dead things and food, which dogs track, obviously. He tracked illness. If one of your brothers was getting sick, properly sick, fever incoming, the kind of sick that required rationing the cold and watching through the night, Soldier knew before the symptoms showed. He would move toward whichever brother it was, circle them, lie against them in a way he didn't normally do. Your mother noticed this first. She mentioned it to Mrs. Halloran. Mrs. Halloran had a story about a dog her grandmother had in County Clare, how the dog always knew when the consumption was coming, how it would sleep pressed against the ones who had it. This is not a mystical thing. though the people describing it often framed it mystically. It's chemistry. Dogs can detect minute variations in body chemistry through smell, the specific compounds that the body releases when fighting infection, when running a fever, when tissue is damaged and beginning to go wrong. The dog's olfactory system, with its hundreds of millions of scent receptors compared to your 6 million, can read things in the air around a sick person that no human instrument in 1847 could detect. So when Soldier sat down in front of you in the dark this morning and put his nose close to your hand, he already knew. He knew before you fully knew. He knew the wound was infected the way a carpenter knows a beam is rotten before the floor gives way, by some combination of experience and sensation that operates below the level of thought. He licks again. Long strokes, working from the edges of the wound inward. His tongue is rough, not sharply rough, not painfully rough, but textured, the kind of surface that cleans as it moves. Each stroke pulls a thin, clear liquid across the surface of the wound. His saliva. And here is what's in it. Nobody in 1847 knows this. I want to be very clear about that. The people letting dogs lick wounds are working from observation and tradition, not from biochemistry. They cannot explain what they're doing in terms of compounds and proteins and enzymatic activity. But something in their tradition had noticed, over generations, over centuries, that wounds treated this way seem to do better than wounds left alone. Not always. Not reliably enough to call it medicine in any modern sense. But often enough that the practice persisted. Often enough that it was passed from mother to daughter and neighbour to neighbour in the courts of Ancoats and the similar neighbourhoods of every industrial city in Britain. Here is what actually works. Dog saliva contains lysosome. This is an enzyme, a biological molecule that acts as a catalyst for specific chemical reactions. And its specific function is to attack the cell walls of certain bacteria. It essentially drills holes in bacteria. It's part of the innate immune system, present in many bodily fluids, including human saliva, human tears, human mucus. But dog saliva has concentrations that differ from human saliva in ways that make it particularly effective against certain common skin pathogens. Dog saliva also contains lactoferrin, a protein that binds iron. Why does this matter? Because bacteria, like all living things, need iron to reproduce. Lactoferrin is essentially a competition saboteur. It goes into an infected wound and grabs the available iron before the bacteria can use it, slowing their reproduction while the body's own defences mobilise. There's also histidines, antimicrobial peptides that have been shown, in laboratory conditions, to actively kill certain fungal organisms and some bacteria. There's nerve growth factor, a compound that, in studies done considerably after 1847, appears to accelerate wound healing, specifically the regeneration of nerve tissue at wound edges. Does all of this mean dog saliva is a good wound treatment? That's a more complicated question than it sounds, and we'll come back to it, because there are things in dog saliva that are decidedly not helpful. Bacteria of its own. Organisms that are harmless in a dog's environment but potentially dangerous introduced into a human wound. It is not a clean intervention. It is not a safe intervention. It is a gamble. But it is, in the specific conditions of 1847, often a better gamble than the alternatives. Soldier works along your palm. His tongue is thorough. He misses nothing. And as the wound is cleaned, not sterilised, not healed, but mechanically cleaned, the debris and dried matter pulled away by that rough tongue, you feel something that you would describe, if someone asked, as relief. Not pain relief, something deeper than that. The specific relief of being attended to, of not facing this alone. The dog does not know he is helping. He is following a drive that is older than he is, older than his breed, older than the relationship between dogs and humans, which is itself older than agriculture. He licks because the wound smells wrong, because the chemistry of your infected tissue triggers something in him that says, this needs attention. He licks the way his wolf ancestors licked their own wounds and the wounds of their packmates, the way every dog that has ever lived in proximity to humans has done the same thing, driven by the same ancient chemistry. And you let him, because you've learned what your mother learned, what her mother learned, what a long line of women who couldn't afford doctors learned in rooms not unlike this one, that sometimes the body needs help that costs nothing but willingness. Your brothers are awake now. Jem first. He wakes the way you used to, fast and complete, going from sleep to standing in a movement that your body hasn't managed since you started at the mill, since the exhaustion became structural, since you learned that sleep is not rest but something you have to negotiate with daily and never quite win. Your hand again? Jem says. He's pulling on his jacket, looking at Soldier, looking at you. It's fine. It's not fine. It's fine enough. This is a distinction that matters. Fine and fine enough are not the same thing. Fine means no problem. Fine enough means the problem is below the threshold, where it takes priority over everything else that also needs doing. Your hand is fine enough. The mill doesn't care about your hand. The rent doesn't care about your hand. The 2 shillings your family needs for food this week doesn't know or care that the flesh of your palm is having a disagreement with itself. Fine enough. Thomas is awake now too, 8 years old and big-eyed with a kind of permanent hunger that isn't just about food but about attention, about being looked at, about mattering. He comes and examines your hand with the solemn focus of a child conducting a scientific inquiry. It smells, he says. Thomas, Jem says. It does, though. It's getting better, you say. This may or may not be true. You believe it with the specific intensity of someone who cannot afford to believe otherwise. Getting better. It has to be getting better. Soldier is still at your side, close enough to touch. He has done what he can for now. Later, when you come back from the mill, if you come back without making it worse, he will do more. This is the rhythm of treatment that you have arrived at through repetition and observation, rather than through any formal understanding. Morning session, evening session, keep it clean. Keep it dressed with whatever clean cloth can be found. Your mother is up. She moves with the deliberate care of someone who has learned to ration effort. Every movement economical, nothing wasted. The walk from the bed to the fireplace as direct as possible, as quiet as possible. The cough she can't quite suppress muffled against her sleeve so it doesn't wake Mrs. Halloran. She sees your hand without asking. Mothers see these things. She comes over, takes your hand in both of hers, and looks at it in the grey light beginning to come through the single window. Her hands are remarkable things. They are your age in reverse. They are the hands of someone much older than she is, because they have done the work of someone much older since she was younger than you are now. The skin is rough and cracked at the knuckles, permanently stained in the creases with whatever cannot be washed out entirely. They are also very gentle, those hands. They hold your damaged hand the way you'd hold something valuable. You'll go to Mass 1, she says. This is not a question. I can go after work. You'll go before. She's there early. The mill will dock you an hour's wages. You'll go. You don't argue. Not because you've been told, though you have been. Because your mother's face in the grey morning light contains something that is not available for argument. The specific expression of someone who has done the calculation and arrived at a number they don't like but cannot change, and is forcing themselves to work with it anyway. An hour's wages, 3 halfpennies, roughly, depending on the week. Against the cost of not going, against the cost of letting the wound keep going in the direction it's going. Even in 1847, even in a court in Ancoats with no access to medical science, a woman who had watched enough people die of infected wounds knew when the calculation had swung. All right, you say. You rewrap the hand in the cleaner of the 2 remaining strips of cloth. You eat what there is for breakfast. Bread, hard, and a scraping of whatever fat has been saved from the last time there was meat, which was last Sunday, which was 4 days ago. You drink from the communal tap in the courtyard, which runs for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening, and which is shared by the 4 families in this court and the 2 families in the court behind, and which is not exactly clean, but is at least, unlike the Irk, not visibly black. Soldier walks with you to the end of the court. He always does this. Takes you to the edge of his territory, watches you go. Then he turns and goes back, because Soldier has territories and responsibilities that don't extend beyond the immediate neighbourhood, a fact he is quite clear about. The streets are already moving. It is 5:30 in the morning. She lives at the end of Thomas Street, which is to say, in a room at the end of Thomas Street, which is to say, in a room at the end of Thomas Street that's about the same size as yours, except that every surface in it is covered with things. You knock at 6:05. You know she's awake because she's always awake. You've never found Ma Swan asleep. Mrs. Halloran says she doesn't sleep. Mrs. Halloran says a lot of things, some of which are more reliable than others, but in this case you've tested it empirically and never found evidence against. Come. She's sitting at the table by the window with a candle burning, even though the grey morning light is already coming through, because she's working with things that require seeing closely. You don't look too hard at what she's working with. Experience has taught you that not looking too hard at Ma Swan's materials is the right approach to maintaining an appetite for the rest of the day. She is somewhere between 45 and 70 years old. This range seems large, but it's accurate. She has the kind of face that moved past the usual markers of aging at some point and settled into something timeless, or rather, she looks the same way she has looked for the entire 10 years you've been aware of her existence. Brown-grey hair, eyes that are the specific shade of pale green that seems to record everything passing in front of them without obvious reaction. Hands, and you notice hands, you've been noticing hands, that are extraordinary. They are stained in ways that have become permanent, blue-black at the nail beds, from something that took a long time to get there and longer still to stop getting there. Brown at the fingertips from the bark preparations, occasionally orange from the root tinctures. She knows plants. She knows the specific plants that grow in and around Manchester, in the margins of the canals, along the riverbanks, in the scrubby green spaces that exist between industrial installations, and she knows what they do. Some of what she knows is accurate, some of it is not. She doesn't always know which is which. This is not unique to Ma Swan. It is characteristic of every tradition of folk medicine everywhere, because folk medicine is an empirical system without controls, and empirical systems without controls are capable of identifying real effects, and also of being very wrong for very long periods of time without reliable feedback. She has used plantain for wound dressing, which works. Plantain leaves contain aucubin and allantoin, compounds that do have mild anti-inflammatory effects. She has used yarrow for wounds, which also works because yarrow contains achillic acid, historically and accurately used for its hemostatic properties. This is where the Latin name Achillea millefolium comes from. The story, probably mythological, that Achilles used it on wounds at Troy. The story may be myth, but the chemistry is real. She has also used preparations for infections that don't work, combinations of ingredients that cancel each other out, treatments based on the colour of the plant having significance, the doctrine of signatures, the idea that a red plant treats blood conditions, a yellow plant treats jaundice, which is not pharmacology, but rather astrology applied to botany. This is what folk medicine is. A mixture of genuine, hard-won, multi-generational observation of what actually helps, laced throughout with confident theories that are completely wrong. And without the tools to tell them apart, the practitioners of folk medicine, the maçons of 1847, operate with the best of what they have. She looks at your hand without asking you to unwrap it. Sit down. You sit. The chair is solid and old and doesn't match anything else in the room. The room smells of things you can't name. Green things, dry things, something sharp and resinous, something else underneath all of it that is more animal than plant. She takes your hand and unwraps it herself, faster than you did it, with the efficiency of someone who has done this thousands of times. She looks at the wound, not at you. At the wound. 4 days, you say, I can see that. Is it quiet? You're quiet. She presses at the edges of the wound with one finger, not gently but not cruelly. The pressure of examination, the pressure of finding out what the flesh knows. You breathe through it. There's deep ache that runs from the wound up toward your wrist, a reminder that this is not contained, that it is spreading slowly in the direction of the elsewhere. You've been keeping the dog on it, she says. At night, yes. Keep doing that. She releases your hand, goes to one of the shelves. There are shelves on every wall, loaded with jars and bundles and things wrapped in cloth whose shape suggests you shouldn't look too hard. Morning and night, long as he'll do it. He's a good dog. He's a good dog. Some dogs do it better than others, same as people. She takes down a small clay jar, opens it, takes a careful smell, replaces it, takes down another. You know why the dog helps. It's not a question, but you answer it anyway. The tongue, something in the tongue. Something in the tongue. She selected a jar now, small, stoppered with a cork wrapped in cloth. And something in the attention. Don't discount the attention. There's a lot of healing in having something stay with you through the night. Something that cares whether you live or die. You think about Soldier curled at the foot of your mattress, watching you in the dark. What's in the jar, you ask? Honey and comfrey. Honey to pack the wound. Keeps it from the air, keeps it from drying wrong. The bees put something in it that works against corruption. I've seen it enough times I'll defend it against any physician that cares to argue. Comfrey for the flesh underneath. Helps the skin close. Don't eat it. Don't let the dog lick the honey off before it's had an hour. Honey, you think about honey costing money you don't entirely have. How much? Come back in 3 days with whatever bread you can spare. This is how Ma Swan operates. She doesn't charge in money mostly because the people who come to her don't have money mostly, and she understands herself. as part of a network of exchange that doesn't run on currency. She gives what she knows. She receives what people can manage. Bread, a piece of cloth, help with carrying the water buckets when her back is bad, labour in the form of small kindnesses distributed across the court. She packs the wound with the honey preparation while you sit very still and breathe very carefully. The honey is cold and thick and not exactly comfortable going into an open wound, but the sensation fades quickly. She bandages it properly with narrow strips of cloth that she clearly washed and kept specifically for this purpose, wound tight in a way that you can already feel is better than your own efforts with the rag. Go to work, she says. Come back tonight. Let the dog at it again before you sleep, after you've cleaned the honey off. Don't let the honey sit too long. All right. And eat something today, not just bread. There's a bone broth at Mrs. Corrigan's on Back Turner Street for a halfpenny. She does it on Wednesdays and Fridays. Go and get it. I'm not sure I have. I said go and get it. She's not angry. She's the opposite of angry. She's the voice of someone who's watched what happens when people who are already depleted try to fight infection on inadequate fuel, and has decided that this particular argument is worth having. Your body is fighting something. It needs feeding. Boned broth, a halfpenny. The mill will take everything else from you. Give this much back. You take the bone broth. This is not how you plan to spend this morning. This is not what your wages budget for. But there's something in Muswan's instruction that doesn't leave room for negotiation without a very good reason. And you don't have a very good reason, only the habitual arithmetic of poverty, which says that every penny spent on one thing is a penny not spent on another thing, which is always true but is sometimes the wrong frame. The broth is hot. It comes in a cracked cup that Mrs. Corrigan watches you drink before she takes it back for the next customer. It tastes of marrow and long cooking and a salt that is probably not enough to be good salt, but enough to change the flavour from nothing into something. You drink it standing in the narrow court, listening to the mill bells beginning. The mill bells, they start at 6 to call you in. If you're not at your frame by the time they stop, the gates close. If the gates close and you're outside them, you don't work that day. If you don't work that day, you don't get paid. If you don't get paid that day, the arithmetic of the week shifts in ways that create problems downstream. You go. The mill is always the same and never entirely the same, which is its particular cruelty. The building is 5 stories of brick, 1,200 people on a full day. The machine's running from 6 in the morning until sometimes 8 at night during the busy season. The noise begins before you get to the gate, a low, complex roar that has no natural analogue, nothing in the world before mills that would have helped you predict what a building full of spinning machines sounds like from outside. From inside, it's a different thing entirely. You work in the spinning room on the 3rd floor, 40 frames in 4 rows. The frames are enormous, taller than a person, a forest of spindles and bobbins turning at speeds that the eye can register, but the brain can't quite process. The air in the spinning room is warm and damp. They keep it damp on purpose, because cotton thread breaks more easily when the air is dry, so they manage the humidity through a system of steam pipes and deliberate moisture, which means that the spinning room in summer is close to unbearable, and in winter is slightly less awful than outside, but only slightly, and the air is full of cotton dust. This is the thing they don't tell you when they hire you. Or rather, this is the thing that everyone knows and nobody officially acknowledges. The cotton dust hangs in the air of the spinning room like a permanent fog, visible in the light from the high windows, invisible in the darker corners. You breathe it. You breathe it for 12 hours or 10 or however long today's shift is, and when you go home your lungs have more cotton in them than they did when you arrived. Over years, this becomes byssinosis, brown lung, the accumulated cotton dust damaging the airways incrementally, creating a persistent cough, then a wheeze, then a breathlessness that is permanent, then worse things still. Your mother's shallow breathing, the cough she can't suppress. This is 12 years of cotton dust working out its accounting. But right now, today, the relevant fact about the spinning room is not the dust. It's the machines. The frames are tended primarily by piecers, mostly children and young people, small enough to move quickly in the narrow spaces between machines, nimble enough to reach into the working machinery when a thread breaks, because threads break constantly. That is one of the facts of the spinning room. Threads break and piecers piece them back together, tie them technically with a specific motion, a quick rolling movement of thumb and forefinger that joins two broken ends seamlessly while the machine is still running. You are a piecer still, though at 14 you are at the older end. Most piecers your age have moved up to being spinners, but you've been at this mill 3 years and you're still piecing because Foreman Whitfield made a decision 2 years ago that has never been revisited, and nobody below Whitfield revisits Whitfield's decisions. Piecing pays less than spinning. You do it with your hands constantly reaching between moving parts. The machinery doesn't care what's in the way. The cut on your palm is from 4 days ago. You were reaching into the gap between frame 7 and the wall to piece a broken thread, and there was a metal bracket that someone had adjusted and not secured properly, and it was in a place it shouldn't have been, and you found it with the base of your palm in a way that took you 10 full seconds to process because the shock of it, the sudden cold fact of metal into flesh, required a delay before the pain arrived. You bled into a feed bag and kept working. This is not presented as heroism. This is what you did because there was no alternative. You bled, you wrapped it in the bag cloth, you kept your frame going. Whitfield came past at noon, looked at your hand and said nothing. Said nothing. The wound happened in his mill, on his shift, because a bracket was where it shouldn't be, and he said nothing. You have thought about this, about the saying nothing, about the specific quality of attention and inattention that Whitfield extends to the people working under him, how he notices when a frame is running wrong, how he notices when a bobbin count is off, how he does not notice when a girl working the third frame on the left has been crying for 20 minutes, how he does not notice when the boy at frame 14 is limping. He notices machines. He maintains machines. People are the part of the machinery that is expected to maintain itself. Today, your hand is wrong and Whitfield will not notice. You take your place at frame 7. The machine is already running, always running. The machines don't stop between shifts except for the Sunday maintenance. They run continuously from Monday dawn to Saturday night. You pick up where you left off. Your left hand is fine. Your right hand, the piecing hand, of course it's the piecing hand, is bandaged, and the bandage catches on things. And after an hour you remove the bandage because it keeps catching, and the thread breaks more often when your hands aren't exactly right. You piece with a bare infected wound for 11 hours. While you're at the mill, it seems like a reasonable moment to talk about what medical treatment for a working person in 1847 Manchester would actually look like, if you could access it. Not the theories, the practice. the actual physical bodily experience of consulting medical authority in the middle of the 19th century. There is a dispensary on New Bridge Street, about a 20-minute walk from Ancoats. It's run by the Manchester Infirmary, one of the larger charitable medical institutions in the city, founded in the previous century and currently overwhelmed in ways its founders probably did not anticipate. The dispensary opens at 9. People begin queuing at 7. On a typical Wednesday in 1847, there are between 60 and 90 people in line by the time the doors open. They are there for varied reasons. Chest complaints from the cotton dust, digestive illnesses from the contaminated water supply, skin conditions from the chemicals in the dye works, injuries from machinery, children with rickets, their bones growing soft for lack of sunlight and nutrition, women with conditions that are difficult to articulate to a strange man and difficult for a strange man to examine with appropriate seriousness. The dispensary is staffed, on a good day, by 2 doctors and an assistant. On a bad day, 1 doctor and an assistant who is not a doctor, but manages quite a lot of the actual work. The doctor at the dispensary this particular Wednesday is a man named Thomas Hartley. He is 28 years old. He trained at the Manchester Royal Infirmary under a surgeon whose methods are competent by the standards of the time, which means Hartley can set bones, amputate, diagnose a range of conditions recognisable to any physician in 1847, and prescribe from a pharmacopoeia that contains some genuine treatments: quinine for malaria, digitalis for heart failure, and many treatments that are either inert or actively harmful, mercury for almost everything, bloodletting for almost everything else, preparations of lead and arsenic for skin conditions that succeed mainly in proving that sometimes the cure and the disease compete for who can damage you faster. He does not know about bacteria. He understands infection through miasma theory. The wound became corrupted because bad air got into it, because the environment in which the patient lives is unhealthy. He is not wrong that the environment in which the patient lives is unhealthy. He is wrong about the mechanism. He sees 42 patients this morning between 9 and noon. Each patient gets, on average, 4 minutes. He is not careless or indifferent. He is overwhelmed. He's doing the arithmetic of 42 patients and 3 hours with the resigned competence of someone who knows the numbers don't work and has stopped thinking about it because thinking about it would make it worse. For an infected hand wound, he would apply a poultice, probably a bread and milk poultice, warm and applied under a tight bandage, with the theory that it draws out the corruption, the bad matter, the miasma. This treatment does, in fact, provide some relief. The warmth increases local blood flow, which improves the body's own immune response. The tight bandage keeps the wound protected. The bread and milk themselves don't contribute pharmacologically, but they don't hurt either. He might lance the gathering of infected material. This, done carefully with a clean instrument, and here the variables of 1847 surgical hygiene become critical, can relieve pressure and reduce the bacterial load. Done with a contaminated instrument, it can spread the infection further. He would not prescribe anything that directly attacks the infective agent, because no such thing exists in 1847. His treatments are supportive. They help the body fight what the body must fight itself. Your body is already doing this. Your body is fighting. The inflammation you feel, the heat, the swelling, the ache, this is not the disease. This is you. This is your immune system deploying the specific set of responses that evolution has spent hundreds of millions of years developing. increased blood flow to bring immune cells to the site, the specific fever that makes bacteria's replication environment less hospitable, the pain signals that tell you not to use the hand in ways that would worsen the damage. The dog is helping this process, not dramatically, not decisively. But the lysozyme in his saliva is attacking the bacterial cell walls at the wound surface. The mechanical action of his tongue is removing debris and crust that would otherwise give bacteria somewhere to hide. The warmth of his presence through the night is, on its own, something. That warmth has effects. Dr. Hartley's poultice would also help. His hot compress would also work. But you didn't see Dr. Hartley this morning. You went to Ma Swan and then to the mill. The question of which choice was correct is harder than it seems. At 2:30 in the afternoon, something happens that changes the story. Frame 7's spindle shaft has been running warm all day. You've noticed it. The smell of heated metal, the slightly wrong sound in the rotation, a stuttering that isn't quite right. You've told the frame setter twice. He said he'll see to it. He hasn't seen to it. At 2:30, the spindle shaft breaks. It doesn't break the way things break in the domestic world. Quietly, along a fault line, with a crack you can locate and examine. It breaks the way machinery breaks, suddenly, completely, with a violence that has been accumulating for weeks. The shaft goes, and the housing containing it goes with it, and the housing is cast iron, and cast iron when it fails doesn't bend, it fractures, and the fragments go where they go. 2 girls at frame 6 are fine. They're far enough. The boy at frame 8 takes a small piece against his arm. A cut, bleeding, not serious, he'll be all right. You take a fragment against your right forearm. This is different from the hand. The cut on the hand was a clean slice from a metal edge. This is an impact wound. The fragment doesn't cut so much as punches through the skin and into the muscle of your forearm, and you look at it for half a second with the specific dissociation that severe shock produces, the quiet moment before the nervous system finishes processing what happened and begins broadcasting it in full. Then the full broadcast begins. You're sitting on the floor. You don't know when you sat down. The floor is wooden and gritty with cotton dust, and there's blood coming through the sleeve of your jacket with a speed that tells you this needs addressing immediately. Not tomorrow, not after the shift. Immediately. Whitfield is there. He is shouting at the frame setter, which is technically the correct priority because a broken spindle shaft threatens production. And production is the thing that matters in this room. But the shouting is happening 6 feet from where you are sitting on the floor and he is not looking at you. The girl from frame 6, her name is Annie, she's 12. She has the specific thinness of someone who's been running on insufficient food for long enough that it's become structural. Annie crouches down next to you and does something very practical. She takes the cloth she uses for cleaning the machine, which is not clean but is more or less intact, and she presses it hard against your forearm, hard, with both hands. Her face is tight with concentration. "Apply pressure," she says, like she's been told this, like someone told her this and she stored it exactly. "I know," you say. "Keep applying pressure," she says. Whitfield finally looks at you. His face goes through a sequence of expressions that you will, later, think about a lot. First, surprise. You've been sitting here bleeding for almost a full minute, and he's surprised, which tells you something about what he was paying attention to. Then something that might be concern, but might be the expression of a man calculating the administrative consequences of an injury on his shift. Then resolution, a decision made. "Get her to the pump room," he says to the frame setter. "Not to you, about you. Clean it up. She can sit out the rest of the shift." She can sit out the rest of the shift. Not he'll send for the dispensary doctor. Not the mill has an obligation. She can sit out the rest of the shift. The pump room has a tap. Cold water. The frame setter, a man named Bowden with thick forearms and the permanently harassed expression of someone responsible for machines that are always about to fail, brings you to the pump room and holds your arm under the cold water and looks at the wound with the expression of someone doing an assessment they didn't ask to perform. "It's deep," he says. "Not to be alarming, just reporting." "I know." "You'll want to get that seen to." "I know." The cold water helps the bleeding. Cold water on a wound constricts the blood vessels near the surface. Vasoconstriction, though neither you nor Bowden knows this term. The bleeding, which was alarming, slows to something less alarming. Still bleeding. Still a deep puncture wound in a forearm that already has an infected hand on the same arm. Bowden finds a strip of cotton batting, proper mill cotton, clean, it's cleaner than anything you'd have at home, and wraps the forearm tightly. He's done this before. His hands are efficient, unfrightened. "There's the Newbridge dispensary," he says, "but you'd better go today if you leave it." "I know." "Your wages for this half day." "I know." You don't need him to finish that sentence. You're already doing the arithmetic. 2 wounds now. An infected hand and a fresh puncture in the forearm of the same arm. The body fighting on 2 fronts at once, already depleted, already running on bone broth and bread and insufficient sleep. You think of soldier, waiting in the court. The weight of him against your side through the nights. The rough attention of his tongue. "Go now," Bowden says, not unkindly, while it's still the afternoon. It takes half an hour to walk to Newbridge Street in the afternoon of a busy Wednesday, navigating the particular chaos of a city mid-shift, the carters and the coal merchants and the women carrying laundry and the children who should be in school and aren't, because the school costs money their families don't have. You hold your arm against your body the entire way, not because it helps clinically, because it feels like containing something. Like if you hold it tightly enough and keep walking, the situation remains manageable. The dispensary is a brick building with a painted sign and a queue that has diminished from morning but still holds a dozen people, because a dispensary in Ancoats in 1847 doesn't really have an off-peak hour. You join the queue, stand. The afternoon is grey and smells of coal, and the specific damp that comes from a city whose drainage is handling more than it was designed to handle. Your arm throbs in the specific rhythm of a heartbeat, which is what it's doing, throbbing with each pulse of blood through the area, each pulse a small reminder that the wound is there and active. The woman in front of you in the queue has a child on her hip. The child is somewhere between 1 and 2, and the child is quiet in a way that children are sometimes quiet when they're sick. The heavy, boneless quiet of a small body conserving energy. The woman has been in this queue for 45 minutes. She doesn't speak to you. Her eyes are somewhere else. At the window, a half door in the brick wall that serves as the intake for the dispensary, you explain the arm. A young man who may be a medical student writes something down and tells you to wait. You wait. The queue moves slowly. Inside, through the half-open door, you can hear the sounds of the dispensary. A child crying steadily without escalation. The crying of a child who's been crying long enough to move past grief into endurance. A man's voice. measured, clipped, the voice of someone whose attention is always already being distributed to more than one thing. The smell of carbolic. Not the surgical carbolic of Lister's later innovations, but something similar in spirit, an attempt at cleanliness in a setting where cleanliness is difficult to maintain. Dr. Hartley sees you at 4:15. He is young, as noted. He looks at the wound on your arm with the attention of someone who has already seen 42 patients today and will see perhaps 20 more before this evening. And his attention is real but compressed, the kind of attention that goes immediately to the most clinically relevant facts and does not linger. New injury, he says. This morning. This afternoon. The mill. He examines it. His fingers on the wound edge are precise, clean-nailed. He turns your arm in the light from the window. Puncture. No fragment remaining, I think. No. Wait. He probes gently, and you make a sound that is not quite a cry and is not entirely controlled. Small. I'll get it out. He gets it out. He has a small instrument for this, a probe, and his hands are steady in the way of someone whose hands have been doing this long enough to stop shaking. The fragment of cast iron is small, half the size of a fingernail. You see it briefly as he drops it into a basin. And the hand. You show him the hand. He unwraps it, sees Marswan's bandaging, sees the honey preparation, gives it a look that is professionally neutral. This was dressed by a neighbour, you say. He examines the wound. Something in his face shifts slightly, the clinical version of having to update an expectation. The wound is not worse than you might expect a 4-day mill cut to be. It is not better. It is approximately at the point it should be, maybe marginally better, the honey having done the thing Marswan said it would do. The honey preparation, he says, and stops. He's doing something you recognize. He's deciding how much to say. Where did she learn it? I don't know. She's always done it. He's quiet for a moment, doing something with the clean dressing for your arm. There is some evidence, not extensive, not well documented, that honey has preservative properties against putrefaction. The Egyptians used it in wound dressings for 3,000 years. He stops again. He's a trained physician talking to a 14-year-old girl from Ancoats, and he's deciding how much of this conversation is useful. Keep using it. Continue what she instructed. He redresses the hand. He dresses the arm. He gives you a printed paper with instructions. Keep wounds clean. Change dressings daily. Return if fever develops above a certain described level. Rest the arm. The instructions are clear and competent and mostly things you cannot do, because clean dressings cost cloth, which costs money, and rest means not working, which means not being paid, which means problems downstream. You should rest this arm, he says, looking at you, looking at the arm, then at you. I have to work tomorrow, he takes a breath. He is 28 years old, and he has had this specific conversation so many times in the week since he started here that it has begun to feel geological, something that is simply part of the landscape, unchangeable. If you work tomorrow and the wound worsens, I know. He looks at you. Then he does something that you'll remember, that will come back to you later in ways you won't entirely understand at the time. He tears a small piece from the corner of his notepad, writes something on it, hands it to you. Mrs. Crow, 3 courts down from Thomas Street. She does dressings, cleans wounds, changes bandages. She works on a voluntary basis. She trained at the infirmary. You take the paper. It's not medicine, he says, but it's more than nothing. The wound on the arm needs cleaning daily, and the hand needs monitoring for the next 3 days. If the swelling spreads past the wrist, past here, he marks a line with his finger on your forearm, you come back immediately. Immediately. That's not negotiable. All right. The dog thing, he says, and he says it in a specific way, not looking at you, like he's placing something down on the table to see what you do with it. The dog saliva. I've heard. He stops, starts again. There are physicians who've written about it, going back centuries. Pliny the Elder described it. There are references in text from the French surgeons of the last century. It's not. He stops again. He is trying, you will later understand, to walk a specific line between his training, which says, don't validate unscientific folk practices, and his observation, which says, this wound is not doing as badly as it should be after 4 days. It isn't something I would formally recommend, but he leaves it there. He's given you everything he can give you, which is dressings, a referral to Mrs. Crowe, and the most cautious possible scientific non-objection to what Soldier has been doing at night. You go. You come back to the court in the evening light, the grey Manchester early dark of autumn, the sky the same bruised colour it was when you left, and Soldier is waiting at the end of the alley. He always knows when you're coming. He knows before you turn the corner, the smell of you at a distance, the specific chemistry of your body, which he can read from further away than you would believe. He meets you at the end of the alley and does the thing he does, the low body greeting that isn't quite submission and isn't quite just excitement, but is some dog emotion that doesn't have a human name. Tail going, nose already working at your arm, reading the new wound before you've said a word about it. His nose at your bandaged forearm, insistent. He wants access. Later, you say. You're too tired to unwrap it right now. You need to sit down. You need to sit down before you fall down, which is a different thing. Inside, the room is its usual evening state. The fire lit barely, a small allocation of coal, your mother at the table, the 2 boys eating whatever there is. Your mother looks at your arm, looks at your face. The mill, you say before she asks. She closes her eyes for 1 full second, opens them. How bad? Dr. Hartley saw it. He cleaned it. It's dressed. It's not. You sit down on the stool next to the fire. It's not bad enough for what we'd be thinking. He said come back if it spreads past the wrist. She comes and looks at it, both hands cradling your arm, the same gentleness as this morning with the hand. Mrs. Crowe, you say, and give her the paper from Dr. Hartley. She reads it. She can read. She learned in the mill school, briefly, before the mill school became less important than the mill, and her reading is slow but thorough. She looks at the name and the address, folds the paper, puts it in the place where important papers go, which is inside the pocket of her second dress, which never leaves the room and serves as a filing system. You'll go tomorrow, she sees. Yes. Marswan in the morning, Mrs. Crowe in the afternoon if you can. I have to work. I know. Her voice says, I know, and I know you have to work, and I know the wound, and I'm adding everything up the same as you are, and I don't like the total any more than you do. But this is the arithmetic, and we work with what we have. Soldier is at your knee. Patient. He's been patient for 20 minutes, but the patience has its own quality. It's not passive. It's an active waiting, a sustained attention. He can smell both wounds through the bandages. He is waiting for you to let him do something about them. You let him. You unwrap the forearm first. The new wound, which Hartley has cleaned and dressed, is raw and sore in the evening air. and Soldier's approach to it is more cautious than the hand. He sniffs the full length of it before he licks, reading it, making whatever assessment his sophisticated nose makes of the situation. Then he licks, careful, the same thorough coverage he gives the hand. You watch his face. He's entirely focused. No distraction, no looking away. The concentration of an animal doing something important, something that his body has told him needs doing. The hand next. He works longer on the hand. 4 days of knowledge in his nose. He knows this wound's history in a way Hartley doesn't and Ma Swan doesn't, and you yourself don't have the clinical vocabulary to understand. He knows the bacteria by smell, not by name. He has no names for them, but as specific chemical signatures, specific patterns of molecule in the air above infected tissue, and he works at the wound with the intention of something addressing a problem it has identified. You sit by the dying fire and let him work, and you think about Dr. Hartley saying, "It's not something I would formally recommend." But, that but contains an entire history. The history of what gets called medicine and what doesn't. The history of who gets to know things officially and who has to keep knowing them quietly, in rooms like this, in courts like this, passed from woman to woman in a tradition that has no textbooks and no credentials, and no formal mechanism for distinguishing the things that work from the things that don't. But something in the tongue, something in the attention. Ma Swan was right about the attention, because Soldier doesn't just clean the wound, he stays. After the licking is done, he doesn't leave. He curls against your side, his warm flank against your hip, his head on your thigh, and he stays. Through the evening, through supper, which he stays for in hopes of scraps, but also, you notice, stays for after the scraps are gone. And later, when you've climbed to the mattress and your mother has banked the fire and the room is dark, Soldier takes his place. Not at the foot of the mattress tonight, against your right side, his body pressed along your arm, the arm with the new wound. His warmth is constant, not dramatic. He's not a large dog. He doesn't generate enormous heat, but constant, steady. Through the night, as your body's temperature regulation does its work, the slight fever that's running, the immune activity that's burning through resources faster than you can replenish them, his warmth is a presence, a steady outside temperature against your own fluctuating inside temperature, something to locate yourself against. He doesn't sleep the way people sleep. He does that thing dogs do, the semi-sleep that is also always a form of attention, ears moving to sounds you don't hear, nose still working even in something like rest, watching through the whole dark night. The fever comes at midnight, or what you'd call midnight. You have no clock, you have the bells, and the last bell you heard before sleep took you was the 10 o'clock, and the fever woke you when the streets were their quietest, the specific silence of the night's deep middle. Your mother is awake immediately. She was, you understand, without being told, already half awake, already watching. Mothers in these conditions don't sleep the way their children sleep. They do something more like standing watch. She comes to you and puts her hand on your forehead, with the same accuracy she brings to everything, the practiced assessment of someone who has navigated enough fevers to have calibrated her hand to the scale. "Not so bad," she says. This is a real statement, not a comfort. The fever is real. You can feel it in the specific way you feel a fever, the hot cold of it, the way the air in the room suddenly feels colder than it should, and your skin feels tight. But it is not the fever of crisis. Not yet. It is the fever of a body doing what bodies do when they are fighting bacterial infection, raising the temperature to make the environment more hostile to pathogens, mobilizing white blood cells, running through energy reserves to fund the whole operation. Water, your mother says. There's water in the basin. Not enough and not clean enough, but available. She soaks a cloth and puts it on your forehead. Cold water, the same vasoconstriction principle as Bowden applied to your arm, the same relief. Soldier next to you has not moved. His warmth is still there, steady, against your arm, his nose at your shoulder. Drink, your mother says. Holds the cup. The water tastes of the pipes it came through. Metallic, slightly wrong, but you drink. Thomas wakes briefly, looks at the scene, and goes back to sleep. Jem wakes and doesn't go back to sleep. He lies in the corner and watches, the way children in difficult circumstances learn to watch, without making demands, without announcing their presence, just available, just here. Mrs. Halloran wakes and makes the small sound of someone going through an internal deliberation, then says quietly, "I'll sit up." "Go back to sleep," your mother says. "I'll sit up." This is the community of the court, of the room, of the 5 people and 1 dog who share this space and have developed, over months and years of proximity, the specific protocols of a small society in extremis. Who watches when? Who wakes whom? What is done and what isn't said? How help moves between people without being named. You think about this later, when the fever is broken and you have enough distance to think clearly. The network of people who were there through the night. Your mother's hand. Mrs. Halloran's presence. Jem watching from the corner. And Soldier, who has not moved since midnight, pressed against your arm. His warmth and his attention are constant in the fluctuating dark. Centuries of this exact configuration, in rooms like this, through nights like this. Long before there were mills in Manchester, long before there was a Manchester, in different rooms and different countries and different centuries, the same elements. A sick person, the people who love them, and, very often, a dog. Because here's the thing about dogs and wounds. The thing that situates 1847 Ancoats in a much longer story. The ancient Egyptians used dogs in healing, not metaphorically, literally. In the temples of healing, the sanatoriums attached to temples of Sekhmet and later the Asclepiaia of the Greek world, the great healing centres at Epidaurus and Corinth and dozens of other sites, dogs were kept as part of the therapeutic process. Patients would sleep in the temple, a practice called incubation, and during the night the sacred dogs would move among the sleeping patients, licking wounds. The priest understood this as the intervention of the divine. The dogs were the god's instrument. When Asclepius appeared in dreams to heal the sick, his animal, the dog, before the serpent became the dominant symbol, was involved in the physical process. This is not primitive superstition casually observed by ancient peoples without any way to assess its effects. The temples of Asclepius had systems for recording cures. They had stone tablets, iamata, inscribed with the cases of patients who came to the temple sick and left healed. Among these cases there are multiple references to dogs. The 5th century BC record from Epidaurus describes a man with a sore on his toe, healed by the dog. An account of a child who was blind, the dog licking the child's eyes, the sight returning. Some of these cases are undoubtedly embellished. The miracle element, the divine intervention. These are narratives constructed after the fact to explain what the priest-physicians already knew from observation. But the observation was real. The dogs were real. The healings in many cases were real, or at least the patients recovered. Whether the dog was causal or incidental to the recovery is exactly the question we can't always answer. Galen, the great physician of 2nd century Rome, whose texts dominated European medicine for 14 centuries, addressed dog saliva explicitly. He was skeptical of folk claims, but documented them. He noted that dogs' tongues were used to clean wounds, and that this seemed to reduce putrefaction. In medieval Europe, the phrase lingua canis, the dog's tongue, appears repeatedly in medical texts as both a literal treatment and a metaphor. Hildegard of Bingen, whose 12th century texts on natural medicine contain a remarkable mixture of genuine botanical knowledge and theological interpretation, discusses the healing tongue of dogs. The French military surgeons of the 16th century, dealing with the infected wounds of constant warfare, noted in their field reports that soldiers who had dogs lick their wounds did sometimes do better than those who didn't. In Asia, the tradition runs parallel and equally ancient. In Chinese medical texts going back to at least the Tang dynasty, there are references to dog saliva in wound treatment. In the healing traditions of the Aztec Empire, documented by Spanish missionaries in the 16th century, dog licking of wounds was common enough practice to merit description. This is not one culture's accident. This is not ignorance. This is the accumulated observation of hundreds of generations of human beings across multiple continents, all arriving at the same empirical finding. When a dog licks a wound, something happens that is better than doing nothing. Nobody in any of these traditions could explain it. The explanation comes from biochemistry, which develops tools to ask these questions only in the 20th century. But the observation was being made 3,000 years before the explanation, and in 1847, in a room in Ancoats, soldier lies against a 14-year-old girl with an infected hand and a fresh puncture wound in her forearm, and he applies a tradition that is older than England, older than Christianity, older than the city around him by 2 millennia. He doesn't know this. He's doing what dogs do. He's responding to chemistry with chemistry. But there's something in it that reaches back across those 3,000 years, something unbroken. The fever breaks at 4 a.m. You know it when it goes. There's a specific moment, not a gradual dimming, but a kind of shift, like a pressure releasing, and then you're cooler than you were and your own skin feels like yours again, and the thin grey light that comes through the window at 4 a.m. is just light. Not the strange, hostile brightness that fever makes of ordinary things. Your mother is asleep in her chair. She's been in the chair all night. She'll be stiff, and she'll say nothing about it. And she'll go to the market at 6:30 with the money for bread, and it'll be the same as every morning, except it isn't. Except she spent the night in the chair, and her back will know it for days. Soldier is still against your arm. He stirs when you move, looks at you, does that assessment he does, nose up, reading the change in your chemistry. Then his tail moves, just once, low to the floor. Whatever he was reading in you that said, wrong, 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 is reading something different now. Better. Not fine. Better. You lie there in the grey early morning, listening to the court come to life outside. The first sounds from the neighbouring rooms, the distant mill bells beginning their 6 o'clock call, the water tap in the courtyard starting its 2 hours. You think about the night, about the fever, which was not as bad as it might have been, about soldiers' warmth through all the hours of it, about your mother in the chair, about the wound on your arm which is sore but not spreading, about the wound on your hand which is undeniably better than it was yesterday. About Ma Swan's honey and Dr. Hartley's carbolic dressing, and Mrs. Crowe, whoever she is, who does voluntary dressings 3 courts down. About the network of things that kept you here through the night. You move carefully so as not to wake your mother, and you go to the tap in the courtyard and you wash your face with the cold water, both hands, normal, and it hurts the arm and it hurts the hand, but it is also the most cleanly ordinary thing you've done in 4 days. And you stand there in the courtyard in the cold grey morning, holding your wet face in your hands and being grateful for something you can't exactly name. Soldier comes out and sits next to you. He looks up at you. All right, you tell him, which is both an answer and something else. He leans against your leg. You go to Mrs. Crowe that afternoon at the address on Dr. Hartley's paper, 3 courts down from Thomas Street, which in the geography of Ancoats puts her inside a different maze of courts and alleys, the kind of place that people who don't live in Ancoats couldn't find without a guide, and people who do live there navigate by accumulated knowledge rather than any readable logic. She is 52 years old. She has a face that looks like someone cut away everything that wasn't essential and kept what remained. She's not a doctor. She trained, as Hartley said, at the infirmary as a nurse. Though that word is in transition in 1847, Florence Nightingale hasn't yet made her mark on what nursing means and what it requires. And the women who do what Mrs. Crowe does operate in a category that isn't yet fully defined. What she does is change dressings properly. With clean cloth that she boils in water before she uses it, a practice she has developed because she noticed over years that wounds dressed with boiled cloth did better than wounds dressed with cloth that hadn't been. She doesn't know why. She doesn't have the bacteriological vocabulary. She has the observation, and she has made it actionable. This, boiling cloth before using it on wounds, is so simple that it is almost unbelievable that it needed to be discovered. And yet the connection between visible cleanliness, invisible organisms, and infection was not established science until the end of the 1860s. Mrs. Crowe is doing something right for reasons she doesn't have the framework to explain, guided by pattern recognition alone. She changes your dressings, both of them. Her hands are competent and unhurried, each movement purposeful. She doesn't ask how you got the injuries in the way that implies judgment. She asks how you got them in the way that implies information gathering. The mill for the arm. The mill for the hand, slightly differently. A bracket, not a shaft failure. The hand was first. She nods, says nothing that sounds like sympathy and everything that sounds like understanding. She has seen a lot of mill injuries. She has the specific knowledge of a person who has treated injuries from the same equipment, in the same buildings, from the same conditions, for long enough to have a mental map of what type of injury produces what type of wound trajectory. The dog, she says, looking at your hand. Not a question. My dog, yes. He's been on it at night. She looks at the wound for a moment longer than seems strictly necessary. Then she does the same thing Hartley did, a professional recalibration. The wound is better than it should be. Don't stop, she says. Whatever he's doing, don't stop him doing it. This, from a woman who has trained at the Manchester Royal Infirmary, not a credentialed statement, not backed by anything that would pass a medical review board, but backed by 20 years of watching wounds and the specific observation of a careful person who has noticed what she's noticed. She gives you clean dressings for 3 days. She charges you nothing. She says come back Thursday. On your way out, you pass a woman coming in with a child. The child has a burn on its arm, the kind you see from the stove, the kind that happens when small people move too quickly through small spaces around hot things. The woman has a dog following her, keeps looking at it, then at the child's arm, then at Mrs. Crow. Mrs. Crow looks at the dog. How long? 2 days, the woman says. He wants to. Let him, Mrs. Crow says. 6 weeks later, your arm has healed. The hand healed faster, 3 weeks, and the wound closed cleanly, leaving a scar that will be there for the rest of your life, a thin white line at the base of the palm that will, eventually, become simply part of your hand's topography. Unremarkable. The arm takes longer. The puncture wound from the mill machinery went deeper, and deeper wounds are slower. But it heals. By November the skin has closed. By December it is a scar, not a wound. Whitfield never addresses what happened. The bracket that caused the hand injury is quietly moved. The spindle shaft, the evidence of inadequate maintenance that caused the arm injury, is replaced with a new one, and the official record of the mill, insofar as it acknowledges the accident at all, records it as equipment failure without the element of preventability that would imply anyone's responsibility. You keep working at frame 7. You keep piecing. Soldier keeps his nightly vigil until there's nothing left of vigil over, and then he returns to his customary place at the foot of the mattress. But you notice, after the wounds have healed, that he still sometimes comes and lies against your arm in the night. Not every night. On the nights when work has been hardest, when you've come home exhausted past the point of speech, when your body's accumulated damage is expressing itself in the way that bodies do, he comes and lies against you. The warmth, the attention, the smell of a living creature who has, in its way, been keeping watch. You think about what Ma Swan said, that there's a lot of healing in having something stay with you through the night, something that cares whether you live or die. You think about what it means to care whether something lives or dies, whether that caring is the same in a dog as in a person, whether soldier, lying against your arm in the dark, is experiencing something you'd recognise as caring or something else entirely, a drive, a response, a chemistry. You think about this question for a long time. You never quite settle it, but you keep watching how he is with Thomas when Thomas has a cough that's lasting too long, how he moves to Jem when Jem has the headache that comes every few weeks and pins him to the floor, how he knew, before anyone else knew, when your mother's lung difficulty was going to be bad this week. He knows. Something in him knows. And the knowing translates into something that looks, from the outside, so much like caring that the distinction may not matter as much as philosophers might think. By the following spring, you know something you didn't know the previous autumn. Not from books. You have no books. Not from doctors. You've only seen Hartley the once and Mrs. Crow on several occasions. From the accumulation of knowledge that moves through a neighbourhood like Ancoats, the way things always moved through close human communities, before there were newspapers and schools and official channels, person to person, story to story, in the courts and at the water tap and in the queues at Ma Swan's. This neighbourhood knows that dogs are good for wounds. It has always known this, but it knows it the way it knows most things, partially in fragments, without the unified framework that would let you explain it clearly to someone who asked, without the theory that would let you distinguish the helpful parts from the parts that don't help. It knows that some dogs are better than others. This is true. not in terms of breed necessarily, but in terms of the individual dog's health and the state of his mouth. A dog with good dental health who eats relatively clean food will have different oral bacteria than a dog who eats primarily garbage and has rotten teeth. The oral bacteria are the risk factor, the downside of the intervention, the reason why dog saliva is a gamble and not a guaranteed treatment. A healthy dog on reasonable food, like Soldier, whose diet is supplemented by whatever scraps the household can spare, represents a better gamble than a dog in worse condition. The neighbourhood knows that it works better on fresh wounds than old ones. Also true, the earlier you introduce the antibacterial compounds in saliva to a wound, the less established the bacterial colony, the more effective the intervention. The neighbourhood knows that it doesn't work on everyone. Also true, individual immune response varies. A healthy young person with reasonable nutrition will respond differently to an infected wound than an elderly person or someone already compromised by chronic illness. The wound doesn't operate in a body alone, it operates in a body's context. The neighbourhood knows all of this without the language for it. The knowledge exists as stories, as instructions passed from mothers, as the particular expertise of people like Maswan, who have observed enough cases to have developed tacit pattern recognition. And here is the thing about tacit pattern recognition in folk medicine. It is real knowledge. It is not as reliable as controlled trials. It is not as precise as biochemistry. It cannot be easily communicated or verified or built upon in the systematic way that scientific knowledge can be built upon. But it is the product of genuine observation. Real, humans watching real outcomes in real wounds over real generations. The people who let their dogs sleep on their wounds were not doing something irrational. They were doing something that had, over generations, been observed to sometimes make outcomes better. They lacked the theoretical framework to explain it, but the observation was there. And this is how folk medicine works at its best. Not magic, not mere superstition. The laboriously accumulated observations of people who had no better tools, slowly identifying real signal in extremely noisy data. We should be honest, because honesty is what this is here for. Dog saliva is not a safe wound treatment. If you've been listening to this thinking, I should let my dog lick my cuts, stop. Stop right there. Dog saliva contains Pasteurella multocida. This is a bacteria that is part of normal canine oral flora. Normal, harmless, present in most dogs' mouths most of the time. In a dog's mouth, in a dog's body, it causes no problems. Introduced into a human wound, it can cause a Pasteurella infection, and Pasteurella infections, without antibiotics, are serious. They can spread rapidly to joints and bone. In immunocompromised individuals, they can be fatal. Dog saliva also contains Capnocytophaga canimorsus, a bacteria that, in healthy people, the immune system generally handles without issue. In people who've had their spleen removed, or who are immunocompromised in various ways, Capnocytophaga septicemia can be lethal, progressing from flu-like symptoms to septic shock in days. These are real risks. The children who died of infected wounds in 1847 Ancoats, and many did, the dog didn't always help them. Sometimes the dog's intervention was neutral. Sometimes it made things worse. The absence of antibiotics means that any intervention that introduces bacteria to an infected wound creates the possibility of making things significantly worse. What the tradition had noticed over centuries was the successful cases, the wounds that healed, the fevers that broke, the limbs that were saved. These were attributed to the dog. The failures, the children who died anyway, the wounds that turned gangrenous despite the dog's vigil, these were attributed to the severity of the infection, to fate, to God's will. Because that's how human beings process data when they don't have controlled trials. We remember the hits, we contextualize the misses. This is not a failure of the people, it is a failure of the methodology available to them. You cannot run a randomized controlled trial in a Corton and Coates in 1847. You can't separate out the variable of the dog from all the other variables, the quality of the wound, the health of the patient, the specific organisms involved, the patient's nutritional status, the environmental hygiene. So the tradition persisted. And the tradition did sometimes work for the biochemical reasons we've discussed. And the tradition sometimes failed for the bacteriological reasons we've just outlined. And the people practicing it had no way to know which outcome they were heading toward. What they had was more options than without it, better odds than without it sometimes, and the care, the staying, the warmth in the dark night. The care wasn't nothing. The care was, in many cases, everything. 3 years later, soldier is old. Dogs of his size and background live perhaps 10 to 13 years, and whatever age he was when he appeared in the court, the best estimate based on teeth and energy was somewhere between 1 and 3. He's now somewhere between 8 and 10. He moves differently. The morning stretches take longer, the coordination less automatic. He still does the greeting at the end of the alley, but he walks back instead of trotting. He sleeps more, not the alert dog sleep of his younger years, but something heavier, more truly restful, the sleep of a body that is starting to conserve. His nose still works. That's the last thing to go in a dog usually. The nose, the central fact of their existence. He still reads the room when you come home. He still knows before anyone else knows when something is wrong. Jem got sick in February, a chest cold that went deeper than it should, the mill dust that he's breathing at his own mill now, a shadow of what's in your mother's lungs. Soldier knew first, moved to Jem before Jem knew he was sick, lay against him through the night, the ancient attention. Jem recovered. Thomas, who is 11 now and larger and louder than seems physically possible from the small quiet boy of 3 years ago, loves Soldier with the uncomplicated intensity of a child who grew up with a dog and hasn't yet had to think about what it means to love something that will die before you do. He feeds Soldier first, always, before considering his own meal. Soldier allows this with the dignity of an animal that has understood for a long time that it is loved. On a Sunday in March, you sit with Soldier in the courtyard in the thin early spring sunshine. Real sunshine, Manchester's occasional spring concession. The air cold, but the sun genuinely there, warm on the face. Soldiers in your lap, which he would never have allowed 3 years ago, when he was still an animal with dignity to maintain, but which he accepts now, resting the weight of his head on your knee with the completeness of trust. You put your right hand on his side, the hand with the scar from frame 7, the thin white line at the base of the palm that will be there for the rest of your life. His ribs move with his breathing, regular, warm through the rough fur. You think about the nights, the fever nights specifically. The midnight moment when the fever was at its height and Soldier was pressed against your arm and your mother was in the chair and Mrs. Halloran was sitting up and Jem was watching from the corner. The specific strange comfort of being held in a web of attention that asked nothing in return, that simply stayed. You've started working with Mrs. Crow now on Thursdays. Not as a trained nurse. That's not available to you. The training costs money, the credentials require a kind of access you don't have. But as someone who carries the water buckets, who hands the dressings, who holds the lamp when the light is wrong, who keeps the small children distracted while Mrs. Crow changes bandages that hurt, you've started noticing things. The way a wound looks when it's going in the wrong direction, the specific colour, the specific smell, the way a patient's face looks when the fever is above a dangerous threshold versus below it, the way Mrs. Crow's hands move and what the movement says about what she's reading in the wound. You have no vocabulary for it. You have no textbooks. You have observation and proximity and the willingness to stay. You're becoming, in your own small way, someone who knows things. The year turns toward autumn. The mills run. The courts continue their life. The births and the deaths and the small daily negotiations with poverty that are the substance of a life lived in ancoats in the middle of the 19th century. Your mother's cough is worse this autumn than last. The mill dust, working out its long accounting. She doesn't work at the mill anymore, hasn't for 2 years. Her lungs couldn't sustain the dust. She takes in washing, which has its own toll on hands and back, but spares the lungs. Jem is a spinner now. Better money than piecing. He came home with a haircut last month, and you weren't sure what to make of that, what it said about the person he was becoming. Thomas is still Thomas, which is to say, loud, hungry, curious about everything, the kind of child who will either become something completely unexpected or get himself into a significant amount of trouble, and it is not yet clear which. Mrs. Halloran has her own room now. 2 courts down, a widow's room, small and grim, but hers. She still comes for supper on Fridays. She brings bread when she can, and stories the rest of the time, which is maybe an even trade. On quiet evenings when the work is done and the fire is burning with the specific warmth of a sufficient cold evening, rare enough to be noticed, common enough to be part of the rhythm, you sit by the window and watch the court settle into dark. The lamplighters don't come to these courts. The streetlights are for the main roads, the commercial streets, the places where the people with money move. In here, darkness comes and people navigate it by the light from windows and the carried lamps of those who have them. Soldier is at your feet. You think about everything you've learned this year, this long year of wounds and fevers and nights when the outcome wasn't certain, about Ma Swan and her honey and her careful jars, about Dr. Hartley, 28 years old and too many patients, and the professional non-statement that was also, in its way, a statement, about Mrs. Crow and her boiled dressings and the simple observation that the boiling made things better, about the dog, about what it means for a tradition to be real without being scientific, for knowledge to be knowledge without credentials, for the body, the long collective body of human experience across centuries, to have noticed something true about the chemistry of healing, without the tools to name what it had noticed. There will come a time when the tools exist, when the lysozyme is isolated and named, and the bacteriological tests are run, and someone publishes a paper about the antimicrobial properties of canine oral secretions, and it receives appropriate academic attention. There will come a time when what Ma Swan knows is categorized as evidence-based or not, as effective or not, as recommended or not. That time is not now. That time is not 1847, not in this room, not in this court. What there is now is what works, and the careful observation of what works, carried in the bodies of women and men who had nothing else to carry it in, The fire settles. The court goes quiet. Outside, the bells of 3 different churches mark the hour, not quite in unison. Soldier stirs, lifts his head, listens to something you can't hear, then lowers it again. Whatever it was, it required no action. The room is warm enough, quiet enough, safe enough, for now. Here is what we know. Joseph Lister publishes his work on antisepsis in 1867. The understanding of germ theory takes hold through the 1870s and 1880s. The bacteriological revolution, the identification of specific organisms causing specific diseases, proceeds through the end of the 19th century. Alexander Fleming notices the mould on his petri dish in 1928. Penicillin enters widespread use in the 1940s. By 1950, the world Swan and Mrs. Crow and Soldier inhabited has changed beyond recognition, medically speaking. The infections that killed people in their hundreds of thousands, septicemia from minor wounds, puerperal fever, bacterial pneumonia, are now, in the developed world, treatable. The antibiotics that didn't exist in 1847 now do. The bacteria that killed the weeping man in the lime-washed room are now managed with a course of pills. But something interesting happens in the biochemistry labs of the 20th and 21st centuries when researchers, not folk healers, not women in Ancut's courts, but researchers with electron microscopes and mass spectrometers, turn their attention to the question of dog saliva. They find the lysozyme. They characterize its activity against specific bacterial cell walls. They find the lactoferrin. They identify the histatins. They run the studies on nerve growth factor and wound healing rates. They produce the papers that now exist in the peer-reviewed literature on the antimicrobial and wound-healing properties of canine oral secretions. And they also find the Pasteurella, the Capnocytophaga, the risks. The conclusion they reach, after all the equipment and all the controls and all the peer reviews, is essentially it's complicated. There are compounds in dog saliva that have genuine antimicrobial and wound healing properties. There are also compounds and organisms that are potentially dangerous to introduce into a wound. The net effect depends on variables that include the health of the dog, the nature of the wound, the health of the patient, and the specific microbial ecology of the situation. Which is to say, what Ma Swan knew, without the vocabulary to know it, is partially confirmed, and the part she didn't know, the risk, is identified, and the overall recommendation is use antibiotics, use proper wound care, don't use a dog in place of medicine. But also, the people who used the dog were not wrong about the things they were right about. The observation, across thousands of years, that something in a dog's tongue sometimes helped wounds, this was not irrational. It was not mere superstition. It was real pattern recognition from genuine observation, carried imprecisely because the tools for precision didn't exist. The people in the courts of Ancoats were not failing to have access to better knowledge. They were doing the best possible empirical work with the tools available, and the tools available were a dog, a tradition, and the willingness to stay. It is very late now. Manchester is still out there in the distance of time. The mills have been knocked down or converted. The courts are gone, built over, replaced. The Irk still runs, though it runs cleaner now, or at least less visibly wrong. The smog is gone. The children don't piece thread for 12 hours at frames that will cut them open without consequence. Some things change. The things that change most are the things that people insisted couldn't change, that the mills had to run that long, that the children had to work at that age, that the courts had to be that dense. These were all, at the time, presented as simply the way things were, the necessities of commerce, the inevitable arithmetic of the industrial age. And they were all eventually changed, because people who lived inside them kept saying, "This is not right," and enough of them said it often enough and loudly enough that eventually it became impossible to pretend not to hear. And some things don't change. The warmth of a dog against a sick body, the specific care of something lying against you through the night, paying attention, staying. The accumulated knowledge of people who had nothing but observation and the willingness to look carefully. The way a tradition can carry a truth for thousands of years while lacking the vocabulary to explain it. The human body in the dark, fighting what it's fighting, using everything it has. Let those images settle now. The fire in the room is nearly out. Just the red glow at the centre of the coal, pulsing very slowly, the colour of something almost finished. The court is quiet. The mill bells are long silent. The city outside, that city, this city, whatever city you're in right now, is in whatever passes for its night. Your breathing has probably changed, reading this, probably slowed. This specific slowing that happens when you've been with a story long enough that your nervous system has made its adjustments, lowered its guard a little, let the shoulders drop. Let that happen. That's what this is for. Think of soldier, if you have a soldier. The weight of an animal lying against you in the dark. The warmth that is steady and undemanding and simply there. The nose that knows things your nose doesn't know. The attention that asks nothing. Think of the tradition. 3,000 years of it. Epidaurus. The stone tablets with the cures. The armies of surgeons who noted it and moved on. The women in 1,000 courts like ancoats who knew it the way they knew their own hands. Passed forward and forward and forward. Think of the body, yours, doing the work it does tonight. Whatever work it's doing. The 1,000 small processes it manages while you're not watching. The temperature regulation, the immune surveillance, the cellular repairs that happen in the quiet hours while you sleep. Your body has been doing this work since before you were born, and it will keep doing it, and it asks almost nothing of you except to give it the chance to do it. Sleep is that chance. Let the sounds of the room come forward, whatever they are tonight. The hum of something mechanical in another room, the distant traffic, the breathing of someone else in the house, if there is someone else, the small adjustments of a building settling into the night. These sounds are not threats. They are the sound of a living world continuing, the sound of all the systems running, the sound of things being what they are. You are warm enough, you are safe enough. You have made it to this moment, which is the only moment that requires your full attention. Everything before it is history. Everything after it is tomorrow. Right now, there is only this, the room, the dark, your own breathing, and if there is an animal nearby, a dog, a cat, whatever version of that ancient arrangement you've made, they're breathing too. That particular rhythm, that warmth. Let sleep come up the way sleep comes when you stop preventing it, the way it loosens things, the way thought softens at the edges and stops being so precise, the way the distance between this room and the room in Ancoats in 1847, which seemed so important, so large, seems less significant now. Just a difference in time, just a different arrangement of the same elements, a person, a body, a dark room, something warm nearby. Centuries will pass and these things remain. Let your eyes be heavy. They've done their work today. Let your hands be still. They've done their work too. Let the wound, wherever it is, whatever form it takes, be attended to by whatever is attending to it, by the body's own long patience with itself, by the warmth you found for tonight. It doesn't have to be fixed tonight, it just has to be held. Let it be held. Let the sounds fade. Let the day go. You've been carrying it long enough. Put it down. The dark is friendly. The warmth is real. You've earned this. Sleep. Good night.